Our next guest is a digital media executive based in Seattle, Washington, but he's a Canadian and he runs the YYZ Sports Media blog looking at the landscape of sports media in this country. It is our pleasure to welcome Mr. Jonah Sigel to our program here on Sekeres and Price. Hi, Jonah. How you doing?
Gentlemen, how are you?
Very well. We should disclose, Jonah and Blake and I had a lot of conversations when we were starting this up here in the digital space. This is what Jonah does on a day-to-day basis. But we're going to ask you to indulge your hobby here on the Canadian sports media landscape, Jonah, because you seem to be doing a lot of reporting on the Canucks. Can we still call them radio rights or just audio rights, and where they might end up for this coming season? What's the latest there?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, thanks for having me on. Matthew, you were, I think, my first ever guest when I first did my first ever podcast.
Right.
So look, here's what I think is going on, and you both in this show are a classic example, and that is that I think we're getting caught up in terminology and what we're calling things. And from my perspective, the medium and the technology is changing. And what it really just is listening, and a digital listening. And, I just drove, I was telling you guys off the air, I just drove from Seattle to Denver in my car. And I was able to listen to your shows and other shows the whole way in my car on Spotify and iTunes and Apple and all kinds of things, either live or streaming or downloaded in a car connected to the internet without having to be on a radio per se. So I don't really care what you call it, but listening is evolving. And I think that, Steve Jobs way back when he came out with the iPhone and all of that, and the iPod and all that changing, it's just a continuous evolution. And I think the next iteration of that is how we continue to digest and listen to sports games.
Well, there are screens everywhere, right, Jonah? So it is very, very difficult to get a live audience to listen to a game that's going on when the chances are there's a screen. Is it really just drivers? Is that basically it, what we're talking about in terms of audio-only audiences for sports games?
I think traditionally, if you go back in time, where were people listening? Forget back pre-television, right? But where were people listening to games? In the last 25-ish years, people have been listening on radios for the most part in cars. Maybe they're listening at cottages over the summer or something.
I think at workplaces too, Jonah. I think at workplaces, people would have it on in the background sort of while they puttered away.
Yeah, certainly in our early days, Blake, a lot of streaming. We heard from people at terminals who had their earbuds in and listening to us. Yep.
No, sorry. My bad. I thought you meant to games. I'm not talking
to games. Yeah, no, but to games too.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
No, but even for games, I think, if there was an Eastern game, I think a workplace might have a Canuck game on at 4 o'clock to sort of be on in the background, that sort of thing.
100%. If you live on the West Coast and you're listening to an East Coast game, or your West Coast team is playing on the East and you're still at work, but I think we would all agree that predominantly listening of games predominantly took place in vehicle, and I think that the mechanism for that, if you will, is evolving and it's changing. And I think the Canucks and the Jets are the first two teams in Canada. I believe the Hamilton Ticats, I will admit I am not up on the CFL all that much, but the Ticats, I believe, are the first franchise in the CFL who, under Dave Cadeau, formerly of the Fan 590, who have brought their radio rights in. I hear he's doing a fantastic job. So I'm not surprised that the Canucks are seriously looking at bringing radio rights in-house, if you will, and contemplating streaming games on their own. There's a lot of heartburn over this. Fans having a lot of issues over how am I going to get my games. I don't think it's going to be that big of a problem. Again, because for the most part, we've been trained to listen on our devices through apps and other things, and you guys are doing really, really well. And it's going to be exhibit A, if you will, of that. But I think that's where this is going.
I mean, personally, for the Canucks, if I was driving home, I would bring it up on the Sportsnet app and listen to John and John. Obviously, not watching it while I'm driving, but I would listen to their audio while I'm driving home. I was effectively doing that anyway, circumventing the radio, quote unquote, to listen. And I'm surprised, Jonah, that the NHL teams don't just go that route and save any of the production costs and just go with one broadcast. How close are we to one broadcast for all of these?
Well, they kind of cheat in a way by doing that through Sirius XM radio to a degree, and that most of the games, if you have satellite radio, can come through that. And if you have a car and you subscribe to satellite radio, if you have the satellite app on your phone, and you can get that into your vehicle that way. So, the monkey has sort of been trained already.
Yeah.
Look, at the end of the day, and you guys are a classic example again, the cost of producing radio is evolving. And from my perspective, what is happening over time is, audience listening behavior is changing. You're seeing it in print all the time. The Blue Jays right now, as you know, their radio person doesn't travel with the team. Things are going backwards, not forwards, from my perspective. And investment isn't necessarily increasing. So whatever they can do to lower costs while audience sizes is varying is ongoing.
You're right. We haven't quite reached the point where Jim Robson's in a closet and banging a piece of wood against another wood block to mimic the sound of the crack of the bat. But yes, you're right. We are kind of heading backwards here in technology in some ways, and going light speed in the other direction in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's a funny time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jonah,
it's not good, in my opinion, for what it's worth.
Let me just ask you this question. So in terms of the Canucks bringing it in-house, like, how confident are you on that? And have you heard any names beyond Joey Kenward?
Yeah, I mean, it's, from my understanding, it seemed to me late last week that the decision to bring in-house was done. Yesterday afternoon, a source told me that Rogers was having a lot of heartburn about that happening. As I said, I've been traveling for the last couple of days, so I've not been able to do much more digging than that. So I'm going to say 70-30 in-house right now. It's not a done deal. And, the only name of interest that I keep hearing is the one that I tweeted out, and that's Joey Kenward, that he's a name. I reached out to him. Most people, for the most part, I get a very polite no comment. I didn't even get a response. Typically, when people don't respond like that, it tells me that I'm onto something. They don't want to get caught saying anything. That's usually the way I take it. So that's how I'm taking it. So something. Yeah. I'm saying that where there's nothing, there's a lot of smoke. How about that?
Yeah, there you go. Today we saw another interesting move. A friend of Blake's and I, Sarah Orlesky, who has been a long-time Winnipeg Bureau reporter for TSN and was out here in Vancouver previous to that. She's making the move to go in-house with the Winnipeg Jets and be their lead host and producer. Are we going to see more of that, Jonah? More of teams poaching existing talent from legacy media brands?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a trend. I think teams, from a digital perspective, are starting to understand the power of media, and with social media especially, they're doing it on web, and why can't they do it in other areas as well? Fans are interacting with teams more and more every day directly, and there's no reason from a team perspective why they shouldn't have the professionals, if you will, controlling that voice. And those of you who have been in the game, pun intended, for as long as you have, are really good at it, and the teams now want the best they can get. And if the teams themselves can hire the top talent away from the networks because the networks are twiddling their thumbs or not paying attention, then so be it. And for the most part, the fans just want access to the best content possible.
Jonah, when I was a young Cub reporter back in September 2001, and a few days after 9/11, believe it or not, when training camps began in the National Hockey League, one of the great fascinations was the advent of Leafs TV, that there was a cable network in the GTA where you could tune in and see Paul Hendricks, their host, from Leafs practices, from games. It was revolutionary that a team would have its own channel.
Every team was going to have one, man.
That's right. Every team. Leafs TV is leaving, at least the cable universe, this week. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not overly surprising in the digital age right now. I mean, I just can't imagine the use for it anymore. Again, you know, we're just in this very strange world of transition where content is everywhere, and the younger generation are not tuning in. First of all, they're not subscribing to cable. They're not getting content from there. And respectfully, they weren't producing a ton of quality content anyway, so why carry the cost? I wouldn't call it an epic failure, but it certainly didn't explode into anything phenomenal. If you remember back in the day when it came onto the scene, people got pretty ticked off that you had to subscribe to it to get certain games. And that was not a good thing. So from my perspective, the fact that it's gone, you know, Paul Hendrick retired. If it wasn't last season, I think it was the season before. You guys will have to correct me, but you know, that was kind of the first sign to me that, you know, things were circling the drain. This isn't a big surprise, and I don't think it's a big loss.
Yeah. And boy, you know, particularly we talk about a changing media landscape, Jonah. Like, could you ever see in previous years a company like Bell Media and a network like CTV move on its lead editorial person like Lisa LaFlamme in the story that emerged yesterday, that they made a business decision to change the national anchor without any kind of opportunity for Lisa to say goodbye, and just tried to quickly hurry Omar Sashadina into the Treyarch, you know, nothing to see here sort of thing. Can't say prior to the last few years that I could have seen that happen as quickly and almost as, you know, dusting the hands as it happened yesterday.
Yeah, what I don't understand, guys, for the life of me, is that you've got a media company, and I'll say it again, a media company who should be better at PR and media relations and handling something like this.
Amen.
This isn't their first, this isn't their first time doing this. She's been there, and I say this with a lot of respect, but forever, you'd think that you would be treating somebody with a lot more respect. It certainly didn't seem that way. I don't know. Like, I don't know what it would have cost them to do this properly with white gloves, with class, and they completely dropped the bleeping ball. They look foolish. They look cheap. They look like they didn't have their you-know-what together. And that's unfortunate because there's lots of different ways to handle it. And from the viewers and from social media reaction, they have egg on their face. And, you know, as I said, nobody can hold the proverbial gun to their head to tell them how to run their business, who to let go, when to or when not to move on from someone. That's their decision. How you handle it and how you address that publicly is a different story. And from my perspective, they certainly didn't do this the right way.
Jonah, are you worried about the lack of big media going forward? And I don't mean big media in terms of corporate media. I just mean the power of a large ensemble. Like, it's one thing for Sekeres and Price to get up onto its feet and others like us as well. But is there a need for a bigger media entity to take on the bigger stories, have the budget to cover wars in Ukraine, cover the Olympics, you know, things like that? Like, are you worried about where media is going there and a vacuum being created? Or do you think it will aggregate, as we've seen with content? Yes, cable is being cut, but really it's just kind of being aggregated into apps, which is going to feel very similar in the end anyway on our respective televisions. Will the same thing happen with media, do you think, that it'll eventually aggregate and we will have bigger entities as well?
I'm not sure if I'm answering your question the right way, but my bigger concern is that the media has become so politicized and everything is quote unquote breaking news that so much of the media is literally unbelievable that it's not watchable. And I think that the one good thing that has happened is that outlets like you guys have empowered people to have a voice, so that what your flavor of the truth is now findable by a lot of people. And from my perspective, pendulums always swing, big, small, from whatever it is. Nothing ever stays the same or constant. Things are always changing. We live in a world of mimic. You see it in sports all the time, right? So I would imagine that, the Avalanche won the cup this year. Everyone's going to try and copy them. So whatever the flavor of the day is, whatever seems to be successful, everyone's going to try and copy. So whatever the trend of today is going to be mimicked and copied until something else comes along. We see it right now that Instagram is now the shameful social media network because they're doing everything they can to copy TikTok. Well, someone else is going to come down the street with something new, and then they're all going to try and mimic that. So from my perspective, I'm not spending a whole lot of time worrying about the things that you're saying, because a lot of really good people have access to a publish button, either through audio or written, or now with video or print, not literally print. But yes. So to me, as long as good people have the ability to publish, and I'm making air quotes around the word publish, I'm sleeping pretty good at night about that.
Yeah. Wow. Jonah, you bring me back 25 years ago to my mass comm classes in Carleton in the future of media. Well done, my friend. You're one of the smartest people in the industry. Appreciate you making time for us today.
Always good talking to you guys.
And I would suggest following Jonah at YYZ Sports Media or YYZSportsMedia.com. A very, very bright guy on the media industry and a huge sports fan who is on top of a lot of movings and shakings in our industry from coast to coast. And his compatriot, a guy by the name of Mike in Boston, at Mike in Boston, with this tweet, Blake, yesterday on the Lisa LaFlamme news. Couple of thoughts. People in sports media get fired frequently. It shouldn't be unexpected when someone making $750K in a dying medium is replaced. Harsh but true. Mike, I would have hoped that Lisa got a goodbye more than we got a goodbye. But his second point, Bell hasn't learned much since they were excoriated for how they shut down TSN 1040 18 months ago. And, one of the things that I picked up after we got shut down, Blake, is that there were some Bell Media executives who were surprised at just how much that lingered. Just how much anger how much lingering anger there was towards their brands, TSN, CTV, and Bell Media. They thought for some reason it would be like a 24 or 48 hour story, and that was that, and people would move on. Whereas, needless to say, our experience was, it was a little bigger than that. And not just because we were involved in it, just because to this day, I walk the streets of Vancouver and hear, miss you on 1040 and those so-and-sos at TSN or Toronto or Bell Media. You can fill in. There's a lot of villains there, or at least they fill in a lot of villains. So,
well, anyways, what I don't get is a lot of these moves speak to me about a company that doesn't want to be in the media business. And if you don't want to be in the media business, sell it. Just don't stop.
Yeah.
Get out.
And in my experience, there were two cultures at Bell Media: an accountant culture and a bro culture. And I think the move on LaFlamme
maybe both
satisfied both constituencies. Yes, sir.